Hello and welcome to another episode of Father and Joe. I am Joe Rockey here with Father Boniface Hicks. And as many of you in the audience will know by now, I have a 4-year-old. And one of the things that he does is he asks a lot of different questions about what's going on, and he observes things that, quite frankly, we might be taking for granted as adults. And he asked me a question here. This coming out so close to Christmas might be a little bit perfect timing for it. Is he says to me, why does Santa Claus always look different? And it got me thinking, like, how do I answer this question? Because 4 years old, it's the start of the magic and all that. And I'm not even totally sure what I said. I'm sure it was an unscientific answer, but it left him walking away happy. But it was something to the effect of, every time you see him, he's going to look a little bit different, and that's okay. That's how it's supposed to be. And then I got thinking, and given the fact that this is Father and Joe, it's going to be correlated to the faith in one way or another, is that every time you see a painting of Jesus or an image of Jesus, he looks a little bit different, kind of like Santa. He looks different in your Coke commercials than he does in the claymation from the 60s than he does with whoever else playing him in any other movie. And I think of this in a lot of different ways. And this is where the direction of this episode is going to be, is that at the end of the day, regardless of what I told him, which quite frankly, I do not remember exactly what I told him, my son got the concept that it doesn't really matter exactly what Santa looks like. It matters that he's watching me and I got to be good. That was the takeaway I wanted him to get from it, and that's what he got from it. And when I think of the way that the faith is taught to me, and he asked me this question at breakfast today, and this is the answer I do remember, and this is how this all will correlate. He said to me, Jesus isn't here on earth anymore. And I said, Joey, no, that's not the case. Jesus is here with everyone who gets the holy meal and wants the holy meal. And he's inside of you. And when you hear things telling you that you're doing something right or something wrong, that is Jesus trying to talk to you. So for a 4-year-old, he got that as much as he could have got that. And quite frankly, I might have explained it wrong. But I do want to hit upon this notion that sometimes we look for things, and if it isn't exactly what we expect it to look like, we don't think it's there, or we don't think it's real, etc. Just as if every time you're looking for Santa Claus, if he doesn't look like Tim Allen from the 90s movies, you're going to be disappointed. And if you're looking for Jesus to look as a specific way, whether it be in actions or physical appearance, you might miss it too. So, Father, those were the thought process that I had that were at me over the last couple of conversations with my 4-year-old. And I think that they're applicable because they apply to our faith in a really real way, because it's a human experience thing.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks for sharing those, Joe. And thanks for the way that you love your son and not only teach him, but actually learn from him. I think that's so ennobling. He is baptized. He's in some ways closer to God than you and I are, because he's also really technically without sin, not having reached the age of reason. His reason isn't sufficiently developed that even the kind of objectively wrong things that he does are not sinful subjectively. So anyway, I love that you learn from him and listen to him at the same time that you share with him, and then bring these things for our conversations. So I think that's all really delightful. Yeah, the way that someone looks, so visual appearance is a very interesting thing. I have, well, you can see on my background, I have also more pictures in my foreground. Religious art, and especially Eastern iconography, is trying to depict something more than photo-realism. And that's where some of our well, anyway, that's where there can be some differences of thinking in terms of how we represent people. So we're also living in an age now where we're canonizing more saints that we have photographs of. The question is a photograph actually the best visual representation of someone? Is there a truer representation of someone that is created by an artist or an iconographer? And this is starting to sound a little bit far afield from your question, but don't worry, I haven't forgotten, and I'll come back to Joey's question about why St. Nicholas doesn't look the same. But when we look at an icon, there are some principles in icons that actually the illumination comes from the inside of the figure, because it's a depiction of the glorified body, the glorified person. And so the way that the shading is done and the light is portrayed is really coming from the inside. It's very interesting. And likewise, if we think of some Western, so those would be more Byzantine, Eastern kinds of Catholic depictions, but Western depictions have their own style of making more beautiful, more perfect, or in some cases, when there is a blemish that's a part of the spiritual makeup of the person. So I think of, I have an image behind me of Adele Breeze, who is the one visionary that was approved in the United States, who saw Our Lady in Champion, Wisconsin. And she was very disfigured, but that disfiguration has become part of her spiritual profile. So it's not just like she had a little bit of acne from time to time. She was significantly disfigured, and that was a part of the limitation in this world, her poverty, that the Lord made beautiful and blessed. And so likewise, some of the signs of martyrdom that saints have will be illustrated with Lucy carrying her eyeballs on a plate or whatever, that some of the indications of how their bodies were destroyed in this world but are glorified in the next. And so anyway, there's a way of depicting a truer reality than simply a photograph can do. It's a little more contemplative view. So in that sense, already we're not depicting even the saints in the same way every time. And so now there's another reason for St. Nicholas not being depicted. We just literally don't have a picture of him that's kind of an accurate, realistic, historical presentation of him. And so we have some descriptions, and we know that he was a bishop, and so we dress him up in certain ways. And then, of course, we have different human beings playing him. But it's kind of interesting that with the saints, different human beings can play him. What are the significant signs that make it? How do we know it's St. Nicholas? Well, because he's wearing red, and he's wearing a bishop's clothes, actually, is what the hat and the cape and things like that signify. And then he had a beard like many of the Eastern. He was from an area in Turkey, which would have been the eastern part of the empire. And so we kind of reconstruct certain features that indicate him. There's like his sort of spiritual profile that presents him to us. And so we recognize him, and some of the other details just don't matter. And so we don't focus attention on those. And the same kind of thing is true of Jesus in terms of we don't have, it's the detailed description of some of his features, even to the point of his height, his hair color, his eye color, the shape of his face, or the tone of his physique, or we just don't have those descriptions. They're not what's most important about him. And even we know, we can guess something of the wounds that he would have endured from the scourging, but we tend to focus on the wounds that were still there in the glorified body, in his hands and his feet and his side, as the significant wounds that we tend to depict even in the resurrection. Those are the wounds that he himself showed us. And so there's sort of a more of a part of his spiritual, what's essential in depicting Jesus, than whatever. And that's why he even appears in different cultures in the native appearance of those cultures, in a Chinese outlook in China, or in a African outlook in Africa, or in a more South American outlook in South America. And so, but he would have the same spiritual marks. So in that case, his wounds, and then kind of a radiance that shows certain qualities of his kindness, his compassion, his gentleness, his otherworldliness, his transcendence, his love for the Father. So it's trying to depict certain things that are essential about him. So in terms of visual appearance, that's a much fuller description. This is why I don't have 4-year-olds, because I could never actually explain anything to them. But in terms of our reflections on Joey's good questions, why do they appear different? Well, because what are we actually illustrating? That what's the same in every illustration, which is why we say, oh, look, that's Jesus, even though it's African in one case, Asian in another case, Middle Eastern in another case, and very Caucasian North American in another case. We still say, oh, that's Jesus. Why do we know it's the same person? Because of the most essential qualities are illustrated in a particular way. And the same thing with St. Nicholas would be true. In terms of Jesus remaining present, I think you said that very well. Like, he is still with us, but again, he's with us in an invisible presence. Now there is bread that is visible in the Eucharist, but the presence of Jesus, which that bread has substantially become, is not visible. We don't see a face. We don't see a hand. We don't see a smile. We see bread. That's what our eyes take in. But our faith takes in the reality of his presence, which is there. And then you correlated that very well with conscience, that voice that echoes in our heart, that directs us towards the good, that directs us away from the bad, and that can even resound truths that we can receive in faith about our own goodness and transcendence, and how we are loved and accompanied. And so the ongoing presence of God is an invisible presence, hidden, as it were, behind other faces and voices and hands and feet, and even the sacraments, and in that case, the appearance of bread and wine in the Eucharist. Christ is truly present there. But again, we learn to see him not by trying to memorize the shape of the bread or the wine, now transformed into his body and blood, but rather by trying to see in them the reality that's there, which is Christ himself in his entire body, blood, soul, and divinity. So that's where we're trying to move from the visible to the invisible. That's a very simple way to summarize everything of what I just said. Part of what God is drawing us to do in our faith is to move from or through the visible to the invisible, from the human to the divine, from the earthly to the heavenly.
Yeah, that's a lot. To try to articulate that to a 4-year-old, as you mentioned, is challenge. It's hard for an adult to get that, and obviously we are past the point of reasoning, and it's just amazing. Sometimes you just see things connect and lock in with him, and I just find that to be great. And this episode's obviously coming out right before Christmas Day. I think it's coming out on the 23rd when you guys will actually listen to this. And a thought that came to me during this, knowing that, well, I don't know this. This is an assumption I'm making about you guys, the audience right now, is that if you're listening to Father and Joe, you're probably somewhat of a regular Mass participant. And all of this conversation we had here, I didn't realize it was going to correlate into this thought at all, but it is that oftentimes at Christmas, there's a lot of people who show up who aren't normally at our masses for various reasons. Sometimes they're traveling. Sometimes they just realize, hey, this one's actually important. We should go to it, type thing. And essentially, Father, your answer about the physical description about it might not actually matter. What matters is what are the actions that are portrayed there. And I think that this is an opportunity to look at those who are going to be coming into our various churches and masses throughout this holiday season to really try to exemplify in ourselves, why being here matters, why being here at Mass matters through things that we call for in the church, living a virtuous life, showing kindness, hospitality, showing a welcoming that you're able to really get something from devoting this time to go to church, and knowing that it's not always easy. I know that my situation's unique. Everyone's situation unique. I got a 4-month-old and I got a 4-year-old. So guess what? It's not always easy to get out the door on time. And that doesn't even count any of the other logistical stuff of it's winter and the tires literally frozen to the street. How are we going to get that one out? Had to deal with that the other day. But the point being is that everything that you just said, Father, about it's not exactly what you look like. It's not that you didn't stumble, or maybe you kneeled slower than you were supposed to, or someone stood up early, or whatever the case might be. They're what matters is the openness and the love that comes across that our faith is supposed to do. And there's a couple of different thoughts that have really been sitting with me going through the Gospels here and reading them as an adult. And one of the ones that just has been staying with me permanently is essentially Jesus says many times, you get out of this what you get into it. The terminology he uses is your faith has rewarded you. And I think that's something that's very powerful, that you have to participate in this. That's my takeaway from it. And looking at how do we treat others when they are the least of my people is the other takeaway. And do we make it that our masses for the people who aren't normally at them are scary and rigid, or are we exemplifying some of these traits so that when people see our masses, that this is where we want to be and I'm going to get something out of it? So that might have been a little bit too far of a stretch, but given the fact that that is going to be in our worlds over the next 48 hours of this episode getting released, I wanted to share it here in this episode. And Father, we have about 3 or 4 minutes left if you have any final thoughts about the topic.
Well, I think what God has done for us in Christ is to make the invisible visible. And what form did he use for that? He used the form of a human infant, and not just the form as if he was just appearing that way, but actually became one with us. And that's what we celebrate at Christmas. And at the same time, he's doing that to draw us beyond the visible back to the invisible. And so as he comes among us, he leaves some impression, although again, he leaves a kind of spiritual impression. So we're not focused on a photograph. We're focused on a spiritual reality that has been made present to us through a human being, the Word made flesh, in order to draw us into communion with that spiritual reality, again, through the human being, the Word made flesh, and through all the ways that he appears in the hearts and faces of Christians, of all of us who represent him in various ways. And so he's trying to draw us by the visible back into the invisible, into the eternal love of God, where we have a home for all eternity. And so as we approach Christmas Day, I just really want to urgently, warmly, tenderly, enthusiastically invite all of our listeners to find ways to encounter him, to set aside time away from the commercialism and a lot of the busyness that can ensue, and to take time for quiet in the home, time for prayer and meditation, time perhaps before and after Mass, time in adoration chapels, just time to sit and ponder this incredible reality, this mysterious and mystical reality of God's love made visible to us in his Son, Jesus Christ, drawing us then into that invisible and eternal love that is always in us and always with us, and that we're just invited to become more and more open to. So just want to make that loving invitation to all of our listeners.
Father, it's amazing how often you will bring up a point that's exactly what I'm going to bring up in the following episode. So I thank you for doing that. And again, we wish you all a Merry Christmas, and we'll see you again next week. If you could give us a little Christmas present of a like and a share, and the written reviews on whatever platform you're listening to us make a colossal difference on all of the different places for people to find us. So by you leaving a written review, you are giving the gift to someone else to be able to find us better. And you guys have been doing amazing at it. Over the last 3 months, they all have been 3 of our 5 highest months ever. So we thank you all for being with us and for sharing us in kind. We will be with you again next week.